The young woman in the red apron knelt beside the old man, placing a warm bread roll in his trembling hands. She didn't ask where he came from or why his eyes looked so tired. Every morning, she simply left a meal. No questions, no conditions. But on the 11th day, everything changed. Four military SUVs pulled up in perfect formation. A uniformed officer stepped out holding a letter. The bakery fell silent. And when that woman walked out, everyone stood. Welcome to Shoaib Buzdar Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. On the dusty corner of Santa Isabel, New Mexico, each morning began with the warm, unmistakable scent wafting from Rosie's Bakery, a bakery nestled between an old pawn shop and a vacant gas station. The air carried the notes of melting butter, vanilla, and rising bread dough. Marisol Rivera, 35, had never left this town for more than a weekend in her life. Every day before the sun peaked over the distant Oregon mountains, she was already in the kitchen, rolling dough, shaping bagels, baking honey-sweet muffins, and preparing the cheddar rolls locals couldn't get enough of. She wasn't flashy, didn't laugh loudly, didn't hang out after shifts, but she remembered birthdays no one else did. She knew which customers preferred more sugar in their coffee and which ones needed their silence more than conversation. And she was the only one who noticed the old man. His silver hair matted beneath a worn cap, his coat frayed and dust-covered, sitting quietly on the bench by the recycling bins at 6:10 a.m. sharp. Every day, he never asked for anything. Just sat there, shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to shrink away from the world. His eyes weren't vacant, but watchful, alert in a way that said he hadn't let his guard down in years. At first, Marisol thought he might be waiting for someone. But after 5 days, 10 days, 3 weeks, he never left that bench without a pause. Never spoke to anyone. And yet, every morning when she swept the back patio before opening, he gave her a slight nod. Nothing more. Then one cold Tuesday morning, with frost still clinging to the windows, she stepped outside holding a brown paper bag. Inside was a leftover ham sandwich, a banana muffin, and a cup of hot coffee with a tight-fitting lid. She didn't hand it to him. She simply placed it on the bench beside him as she walked by and muttered, mostly to herself, "Guess the kitchen overdid it today." The man looked at the bag, then at her. His eyes didn't plead, didn't rush, just watched, cautious as though trying to decide whether this was kindness or a trap. Then he nodded again, slightly deeper this time. The next day he came back. So did the paper bag. And just like that, it became their unspoken ritual. No greetings, no questions, no names, just a bag, a cup, and a quiet nod between strangers. She never told anyone about him. She wasn't even sure why she did it. Maybe it was something her father once told her about the war, the way children would scavenge crumbs under soldiers' boots. Or maybe it was her own memory of being that hungry child once herself. Not in a war zone, but in a too-quiet home after cancer took her mother. Or maybe it was simply this. He was hungry and she knew how to bake. It didn't take long before people started to notice. One Wednesday morning, as Marisol arranged fresh bagels on the display rack, she caught a whisper near the coffee counter. "He's back again," a woman muttered. Not quite loud enough to be rude, but just loud enough to be heard. "Marisol's running a charity now," a younger co-worker joked as he wiped down the windowside booth. "Or do we just hand out free pastries to anyone who hasn't shaved in a month?" Marisol didn't respond. She kept slicing the warm loaves, each movement deliberate, each piece placed like it carried a quiet meaning she didn't want interrupted. A few days later, Mr. Raoul, a retired teacher who drank a double espresso every morning, glanced out the window and shook his head. "Back in my day, guys like that wouldn't dare hang around respectable shops. And no one was handing out freebies just because they looked pitiful." Marisol smiled politely, said nothing. Her hands never paused as they dusted flour onto the next batch of rolls. Only Rosa, the elderly lottery vendor who sat 2 blocks down by the market, leaned in as she picked up her usual drip coffee and whispered, "You've got your mama's heart. You know that." Marisol paused just for a moment. Rosa had known her mother, the woman who used to make soup from leftovers and hand it to strangers during cold winters. Marisol couldn't remember her face too clearly anymore, but she remembered those hands, always warm, always busy, always smelling like parsley and dish soap. That same morning, the man didn't show up. Marisol still packed a bag, still brought out the coffee, still placed it on the bench at 6:10. A gust of wind blew the napkin from the bag. It fluttered across the empty parking lot like a small flag with no country. She watched it drift. The next day he didn't come, and the next. On the fourth day, Gustavo, the bakery owner, called Marisol into his back office. The room was small, tiled in fading linoleum, and smelled like ink and burnt coffee grounds. He didn't waste time. Marisol, I know your heart's in the right place, but customers are starting to talk. That man is making people uncomfortable. She tightened her grip on her apron. He's never stepped inside. He's never asked for anything. But you're giving him something every day, Gustavo said. This isn't a soup kitchen. She stayed silent. Not because she didn't have words, but because if she opened her mouth, she might cry. I pay for the food myself, she finally said. It's leftovers. It doesn't come out of inventory. Gustavo exhaled, rubbing his forehead. Look, I'm not telling you to stop. Just don't make it obvious. All right, if you're going to leave food, do it out back or something. Marisol nodded. That night, she emptied the tip jar in her apartment. It wasn't much, just enough for a loaf of bread, a coffee, and a muffin each day. She slipped a few bills into a plain white envelope and wrote in neat handwriting. Covered 5 days' breakfast. No one would ever ask to see it. No one needed to. To Mara's Saul, kindness didn't require permission, only intention. A week went by. The bench outside the bakery, the one where a paper bag and a steaming cup of coffee had rested each morning, now sat bare. For the first time in nearly 2 months, Marcel found herself preparing a breakfast that had no one waiting for it. Still, she packed the bag at 6:10. Still placed it on the bench, still watched from the window. No one came. By Saturday, a strong desert wind knocked the open sign sideways. Marisol wrapped up the untouched meal and put it in the fridge. She didn't need it, couldn't throw it away, just couldn't leave it out there anymore. The emptiness felt too heavy. 10 days since she'd last seen him, she received a message from Rosa with a link to a Facebook post. It was a photo taken across the street, clearly showing her bakery, her bench, and her brown paper bag sitting untouched. The caption read, Rosa's bakery now feeding imaginary customers. Guess good PR is more important than good sense. The comments were worse. Marketing stunt. Bet. She says it's for underprivileged folks and just tosses it. Feeding strays only creates more of them. Some people really need a reality check. Marisol locked her phone. Didn't read anymore. That night, back in her small apartment above the bakery, she opened the lowest drawer of her dresser, the one that held the last things her mother ever owned. Inside was an old silver tin box, worn but kept clean. She unlatched it gently, pulling out a battered leather-bound notebook with frayed edges and a loop strap. Her mother's journal. Marisol turned to the page she'd read countless times as a child. The ink had faded, but the handwriting remained steady, calm, patient, and clear. Gave half my ration today to a little boy crying outside the fence. Some said I was crazy, that he could be a trap. But his eyes, they reminded me of myself the day my father didn't come home. No one grows poorer by sharing bread. But those who forget to share, no matter how full their tables, stay hungry in ways they'll never understand. Marisol ran her finger across the final line, as if trying to touch a part of her mother's spirit through the page. She didn't know the man's name, didn't know where he'd gone, didn't know if she'd ever see him again. But she didn't need to. He had been hungry, and she had still had bread. On the 11th morning, the sky was overcast and the air damp, a rare kind of chill in Santa Isabel. Marisol was wiping down the pastry case when the sharp sound of tires pressing into gravel made her glance up. 4 military SUVs, matte black, spotless, and perfectly aligned, pulled up in front of the bakery. Their synchronized arrival drew every head in the bakery toward the windows. Even the espresso machine seemed to hiss quieter. Each vehicle door opened with a quiet click. Uniformed soldiers stepped out 2 by 2, their movements crisp and rehearsed. No words, just discipline, just presence. Then from the lead SUV, a tall man emerged. His face was tanned by sun and time, but carried a steadiness that seemed immovable. His dark blue dress uniform was immaculate, adorned with ribbons and medals that caught what little light filtered through the clouds. He stepped toward the entrance. The bell above the door chimed, unusually loud in the silence. Everyone turned. The room had frozen. "Is there a Marisol Rivera here?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. She stood behind the counter, hands still damp from polishing glass, her voice caught in her throat. "Yes," she said quietly. The man walked forward with measured steps. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel David Santos, United States Army Special Forces. I'm here because of a promise." From the inside pocket of his uniform, he pulled a sealed envelope. Thick, official-looking, stamped and folded with care. This letter is from Ignacio Torres, the man you brought breakfast to each morning. Marisol's eyes widened. Her hand reached for the counter to steady herself. Colonel Santos continued. He was the father of Sergeant Mateo Torres, one of my best men. Mateo was killed in action 2 months ago during an operation overseas. After that, Mr. Torres disappeared. A hush fell across the room deeper than before. He carried guilt, more than anyone knew. But 3 months ago he wrote me. Not about his grief, not about his son, about you. The colonel held up the envelope. In his final letter, written days before he passed away from heart failure, he asked us to find the woman in the red apron. He said, "You didn't ask questions. You didn't offer pity. You simply gave him food. Every morning, as if he mattered." Marisol couldn't speak. She barely breathed. "In his words," the colonel said, voice thickening ever so slightly, "she made me feel like a person again, like I was more than my sadness. Tell her she helped a father believe the world still had kindness left for the broken." He stepped back, came to full attention, and rendered a formal salute. Every soldier outside followed suit, standing straight in the open air, saluting the woman behind the glass counter of a bakery. Marisol's tears came silently. She hadn't saved a life, hadn't fought in a war. She had just baked a roll, poured a cup of coffee, and offered it without asking why. But somehow that small act had found its way to a battlefield, had wrapped itself around a soldier's memory, had become part of a promise that was now being kept. Word spread quickly. Within 3 days, the photo of Marisol standing behind the counter, tears in her eyes as uniformed soldiers saluted her, had made its way across the town and beyond. The local newspaper ran a story titled "The Morning Ritual" that helped a father heal. Marisol didn't change her routine. She still opened the bakery at 5:30 a.m., still wore the same red apron, still kneaded dough with the same quiet focus. But the people changed. A young mother walked in with her toddler and left a folded note on the counter. "My brother's a Marine. Thank you for remembering that soldiers leave families behind." An older man placed a challenge coin, one of those given among military units as a sign of respect, beside the register and simply nodded. Vietnam 74. First time I've believed in people again. Some came not to buy but to sit, to leave patches, medals, handwritten prayers. Veterans, widows, children. Each one had a story, and somehow a loaf of bread had given them permission to tell it. Then one morning, tucked among the thank you cards on the wall, Marisol found a letter in a child's handwriting. "Dear Miss Marisol, I'm Lucia, Ignacio's granddaughter. We didn't know he was gone until someone from the base called. But Grandma said he always talked about you. Said you gave him food when no one else even saw him. We found a box under his bed with every napkin you folded, every little note you left on the bag. He never threw them away. Thank you for being kind when he needed it most. Love, Lucia." Marisol framed the letter and hung it behind the counter. Not where everyone could see, just where she could. A month later, Gustavo walked in early, holding a wooden sign. He didn't say much, just mounted it beneath the old bakery logo outside and dusted off his hands. The sign read, "Bread for those who need it. No questions, no shame." One autumn morning, a teenage girl lingered outside before stepping in. Her hands were stuffed in her hoodie, her eyes wary. "My dad's deployed," she mumbled. "My mom cries a lot. I just wanted to know if you still have any bread." Marisol smiled gently. "We've always got bread," she said. "And a seat and coffee and someone to listen if you want to talk." She placed a warm roll on the table, then walked away, just like she used to. That evening, while cleaning the back counter, Marisol found something left beside the flour bin. Another challenge coin, heavier than the first. Its inscription read, "Sir Fidelis, never forgotten." She slipped it into her pocket. Didn't ask who left it. Didn't need to. Outside, the sky glowed amber, casting a soft light across the windows of the bakery. Inside, the ovens hummed, and a promise made not with words, but with breakfast lived on. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places, not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Shoaib Buzdar Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.